So let's talk about something very, very interesting. In 1916, there was a formal sale started, or the formal sales process between Denmark and the United States started. The sale in question was the purchase of the then Danish West Indies, which are today known as the US Virgin Islands in the Caribbean. So, with respect to the deal, how it went through, I don't really know. I don't really care. I think the US paid Denmark $25 million in gold at that time. I don't know how much that's in today's money, but it's probably a lot. Now, whether it was worth it or not, I'm not going to speculate in. But here's something that I am going to speculate in. And also talk about from a persuasion perspective's point of view. Part of the deal was the purchase of Little James Island. I believe that's the name. Little James Island, which is today known as Epstein's Island. Oh yes, there it is. So Denmark sold some land to the United States in 1916, and part of the deal, or part of the land, part of the package was this little island, Epstein's Island. So technically speaking, if you're semantically obsessed with the meaning of words, one could say theoretically that Denmark sold Epstein's Island to the United States. If you think about it, because they sold a piece of land, or they sold some islands to the United States. Parts of those islands, or one of those islands was Little James Island, Epstein's Island. So technically speaking, Denmark sold Epstein's Island to the United States. And of course, this is where all the hullabaloo and rigmarole and all these shenanigans begin, because if Denmark sold the Danish West Indies to the United States, and some dude who was a billionaire who probably received money from elsewhere bought the island and did various scandalous activities there, imagine what the hell is going on Greenland, or in Greenland, if the United States turns out to purchase Greenland. Now, I doubt that's going to happen. As of this recording, I doubt the United States is going to purchase the entire Greenland area, the entire Greenland island, but they're probably going to acquire parts of it. Speaking of which, there was some sort of deal made, I think, between NATO, the EU, perhaps Denmark, and the United States, where the United States were granted access to parts of the island. I don't know the extent of that deal. Anyway, but it's pretty fascinating to think about how just quickly it vanished under the table. There was some talk about Trump buying Greenland, and then all of a sudden there was this rigmarole and these rumors about the United States potentially invading Greenland, which of course hasn't happened yet and probably is never going to happen either. And then there was a deal made, and all of a sudden, you didn't hear anything, which is pretty fascinating and interesting in its own right. Anyway, let's get back to the point here. The point is of course, when you have such a notorious rumor tied to an island, like Epstein's Island, that island is forever tainted. And so, with respect to persuasion and so on, this can be very, very dangerous and misleading, especially when it comes to Greenland, because there is the truth. And by the way, I'm completely neutral on this. It's going to sound like I'm perhaps taking a dump on Greenland, but I'm really not. I'm just asserting the logical cold hard facts here. Greenland was ruled for the longest amounts of time by Denmark. The Danish didn't treat the native Greenlanders, the Inuits, they didn't treat them well. The Eskimos. Yes, I say Eskimos, shoot me. They didn't treat them well. They were forced to learn Danish. Some of them were sterilized. I don't think many of them were sort of like given job opportunities or whatever, and they essentially behaved like a colonial superpower for years and years and years. That's a fact. Those are indisputable facts. Now, since, I don't know, maybe 100 years ago or so, things have probably improved a little bit up there. I don't really know. But what I do know is there are struggles in Greenland. People are drinking a lot. There's a lot of suicide. And it's kind of like not this glamorous life that's up there. That's also just a fact. I've heard it from several people who have been there. I've heard it from several people who know the area. So again, here's the point. When you tie, and just hear me out. Yes, even though Denmark historically has not as, let me rephrase that again. Even though Denmark historically not has treated the Greenlanders, the native Inuits, the Eskimos, very, very well, that doesn't mean that they're this brutal superpower today, but they traditionally, historically used to, I think it's fair to say, abuse them. I think that's fair to say. And so when you tie that rumor to Denmark and makes it look like Denmark is this horrible slave nation, and also that they sold Epstein's Island, for lack of a better name, to the United States, you can get this wrongfully skewed impression of Denmark. And that's very, very dangerous, because that doesn't reflect reality. It doesn't reflect reality at all. It's the same thing when actually, when Trump came out and said something about the international veterans of who participated in the war in Afghanistan and how they largely stood away from the front lines. That's, of course, not true. That's grossly misleading and exaggerating. There's plenty of people. I don't know the amount of foreign soldiers. I don't know the amount of non-U.S. soldiers who lost their lives in Afghanistan, but the number is significant. Let's just put it that way. And clearly, that wasn't what the president meant. I think everyone knows that. Now, I admittedly didn't hear the exact wording he was using, nor did I hear the context, but it could have appeared like he was trying to emphasize the point that Americans largely were in lead, which might be true, because I wasn't there at the front line in Afghanistan, so I don't really know. And so he was just emphasizing the point that Americans led first and then took the others with them, but that doesn't mean that the other soldiers didn't partake in the battles at the front. Again, those are just my theories and speculations here. But the point is, irrespective of this, when you assign a poor, and because of that, he assigns a bad value, he assigns like a bad character to these foreign soldiers, which is quite scary, and which is, of course, wrong, and it's disrespectful to those who lost their lives, obviously, and it's also disrespectful to the probably millions, maybe not millions, but probably tens of thousands of soldiers who served there, and who may have been injured physically or mentally, or just risk their lives going there. And so this brings me back to the point there. When you notoriously assign, or when you routinely assign a bad value or a bad rap to some place, like Epstein's Island, and how Denmark was historically oppressed the native Greenlanders or the Inuits or Eskimos, and how one president's take on the participation of other soldiers is misleading at the best. You sort of like persuade with wrong and negative energy, if that makes sense. You persuade with wrong and negative energy, and you assign a negative value to stuff because you always talk about stuff from a negative point of perspective. And that means that people will start judging sad item or person or situation from a negative lens, or through a negative lens rather. And that's that's a very, very dangerous way of doing persuasion. So think about that. And think about that especially when it applies to business and so on, and how you can essentially take a dump, take a crap on other people, not by calling them names, but just saying what they did that was wrong back in the day, or talk about all the negative stuff that they did, and deliberately neglect all the positive stuff that they're also doing. So think long and hard about that. And yeah, that's today's persuasion lesson of the hour. If you want to learn more about persuasion and business and so on, get subscribed to my email list. The link to do so is in the episode description wherever you're watching and or listening to this. And I'll see you there.